Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining. It's been a really crazy week, but I'm really excited to be here with y'all, and we have a ton to talk about. Um, this is the Butchery 101 weekly live stream where we break down the news of the week in meat, food, and agriculture. My name is Christina Glenoga, and today, oh my gosh, we have so much to talk about, so let's get to it. Sorry if my top's a little low. Okay, so today's top story is about the drought that is definitely already starting and definitely has been affecting farmers for years already. And this year in particular, it's already getting bad for them. A story published in NPR, let's see, gosh, on the 3rd, it looks like, of June, and they interviewed a bunch of farmers. And they're literally already feeling it. So the point is that, or one of the farmers is a rancher in Washington State, and he was saying that he had to sell off quite a bit of cattle to another rancher in Wyoming because oh my gosh, what is the word I'm looking for? There won't be enough resources here in Washington State for him to take care of that amount of cattle on his own land. So he had to sell off the head of cattle, and it's so unfortunate because that stuff takes so much work and time and effort to build up a herd like he did. And this doesn't just affect, ranchers, but it also affects every single farmer you can think of producing every single type of food that you can think of. Fam, I just want to point out that this is climate change. This is 100% climate change happening now. And if we don't start paying attention to it now, then we will start to face more cases of food insecurity in like a very real way. So something that I'm going to try to encourage everybody to do is to get involved with your government representation and just check to make sure that they are acknowledging the reality of climate change and the reality of the consequences that we're facing in terms of climate change, and making sure that they are advocating on our behalf for a future that is actually sustainable for all of us. I personally like to use the website A Starting Point to keep up with political education. Let's just set aside for a moment that it was co-founded by America's boyfriend, honorary person of color, Christopher Jamal Evans. But I have found that it is a really easy and effective way to learn about your representatives, their perspectives, and the perspectives of other representation in government in a way that isn't based in toxicity, like for the sake of views. So I think it's super duper important. And if you're watching this live right now, sorry, but I won't have the link in the description for you just yet. But if you're watching a recording of this, there should be a link below to that website so that you can check it out. Again, that is astartingpoint.com. And it's super easy to use and to get to know who your representation is. Our second story of today is about the opposition to debt relief for Black farmers in America, Black and brown farmers in America. In light of last week's sudden new national holiday, I think this is a great spot to start your personal education on the subject of Black people's struggles in America. On Saturday, Juneteenth, I posted some tips on Instagram on how we non-Black people can, dip our toes into appropriately commemorating Juneteenth. And truthfully, the first step is just to educate yourself. Not in a way that like demands unpaid, kind of traumatizing emotional and intellectual labor from like the one Black person but in a way that truly expands your personal understanding of American history and the context of what it is happening today. The Daily Show did a segment, and it was amazing. So I've linked it below, or I will link it below. So when you're watching the recording of this, you can find it. But they did a segment on it that I think did a fantastic job at outlining the current situation and its historical context, starting in the 1920s to a few decades ago, and some like very recent events. Just a quick rundown of what has happened. The Biden administration budgeted money to allow for federal debt relief for Black and brown farmers to offset systemic racism executed and enforced by the USDA itself. And I personally think that's a fantastic step in the right direction. What we're not so stoked on is the staunch opposition by white farmers, pundits, and judges. And again, please do click through to watch that video by The Daily Show, because they really do put in perspective like a lot of historical context and like really kind of put people on blast for being kind of unreasonable about opposition. So I feel like it's really important that before we start like lobbying support or opposition to such things, that we really understand like the grander scheme and historical context of why such legislation is really important in this day and age, especially it's important to know what's going on in the past. Okay. So now that we've gotten a couple stories out of the way, that's not even our main topic today, you guys, but I still have like a ton of other stuff to get through. But I did want to take a moment and give a couple of channel updates and announcements that I'm super stoked about. The first one being that we're starting a new Patreon exclusive series. I'll be unboxing and breaking down literally and logistically one protein every week on a live stream just for Patreons. That means there'll be like a little bit of butchery. You'll see the process pretty much start to finish of like what I as a purchaser and end consumer of these meats will do. And I will be discussing how I plan to utilize the whole thing throughout my week. I'm working on sourcing some really cool and fun kind of esoteric cuts from my local farmers. But yeah, so we can get into like the real unromanticized reality of what it's like to buy from your local farmer. That'll include cuts that we're not all super familiar with, packaging and storing tips, and then 100% utilization tips that have the entire process from farm to processor to end consumer in mind. I'll also disclose the journey I took to source these proteins, so you get the full picture of what the local buying experience is like. Hopefully, this will help realign our intentions to support local with our actions that can truly support local independent farmers. This week will feature the nicest chicken that I'm able to purchase at my local supermarket. And yes, I realize there are tons of ethics issues in those types of businesses. But to be honest, there are also like many people who wish they could do better but cannot afford to, either due to budget or time or other logistical constraints, like me. Like, so for example, anybody else who works in the service industry, it's pretty obvious that we don't make a ton of money, and therefore it's kind of unrealistic to expect those of us who have worked in the food industry to kind of like spearhead, to like lead the charge on maintaining those super ideal, like bucolic farm standards in our own kitchen. But that doesn't mean that like you can't still honor like the whole animal. A super wise friend once told me, go hard on the system, but go easy on people. And actually that friend, I'm just going to plug her business. That friend is Sunny Diaz of Stella Finds Truffles and Little Cascadia. I'll link her Instagram handles down below so you can go follow her, because like truly my friendship with her has been like life-changing and like very expansive. It's wonderful. So yes, this week we'll be doing chicken. The following weeks will feature duck and some amazing rabbit by Valley Farmstead, and I'm super excited. These live streams will launch and be put up weekly on Wednesdays. So that is to say, tomorrow is the first one. To join, please click on the link below to my Patreon page and join there. Even the most basic level gets access to these live streams and also other exclusive content like long form versions of the YouTube videos, the YouTube tutorials specifically, if you wanted more detail out of how to break down proteins. This Friday, I'll be uploading a second video on my favorite media to watch if you're interested in learning about meat and butchery and food in general. I learned a lot from the internet when I was first starting out in my career, partially because I just didn't have a foot in the door or like any family heritage to teach me how to do this stuff. And so, and there's not like really a school or anything around where I live to learn this stuff. So yeah, like a lot of my education did come from the internet, and I just want to pay it forward and let y'all know how it is that I got my start, and then so that you can see that stuff. Anyway, that's coming out on Friday. Oh my gosh. And there is so much more to tell y'all about. I have some super exciting upcoming projects for this channel and Butchery 101 in general. But we have to get on with the news because I don't want this to be like a 2-hour long live stream. So please do hit subscribe for this channel so you don't miss any of the really awesome content that's coming out. Become a Patreon or support this channel on GoFundMe if you can. And yeah, just make sure that you're involved. So thank you so much. Okay, now back to the news. So I'm just going to take a quick water break. Okay, great. So today's main story involves the USDA and big meat, essentially, the big meat industry in the United States. So this is from an article from the Wall Street Journal. So who it involves is large meat companies, including JBS, which we've talked a lot about on this channel. I have an update on them and their cybersecurity hack that I'm going to talk about later in today's live stream. So stay tuned for that. So large meat processing companies like JBS, National Beef, Tyson, Cargill, Smithfield, their representatives like the North American Meat Institute, National Chicken Council, etc., like those large industry groups that lobby to Congress on their behalf. And our governments, specifically a USDA senior advisor for fair and competitive markets by the name of Andy Green, and someone from NAMI. And another note about Mr. Green, that's who I quoted in my Instagram post yesterday regarding today's live stream. And he said verbatim, the food industry in America has a monopoly problem. I'll go more into detail about like why his expertise is important in this scenario, but heads up. Okay, and then finally, it also involves farmers who are getting lowballed currently in prices for their livestock, and also consumers who are paying historically high prices for meat. So what's been going on is that the large meat processing companies have a straight up monopoly, and the government is making moves to discourage that monopoly. Let's see. So we can go, let me skip ahead to talk some stats with y'all. So this is a direct quote from that article. Nearly 3/4 of the U.S. beef supply is processed by JBS, Tyson, Cargill, and National Beef Packing Company. Just as an aside, so y'all know, every single like independent rancher and processor and butcher shop that you know, all together make up 27%. And so that is to say, all of the rest of it is controlled by 4 companies control 73% Yeah, 73% of the entire beef industry in the United States. If that doesn't scream monopoly to you, re-examine your definition of monopoly. Okay, so the quote continued. In pork, Smithfield Foods Incorporated, JBS, and Tyson, those same two, represent about 60% of the market. And in chicken, the five largest players, including Tyson and the JBS subsidiary Pilgrim's Pride, handle 60% of the country's wings, breast meat, and other poultry products, according to industry estimates. I just want to point out really quick that JBS, that one company, popped up in every one of those sectors, in beef, pork, and chicken. And those are the top three in the United States. And they control a majority share. Maybe not majority share. I'm not sure what that term means exactly, but they control a lot of every single one of those sectors. Just keep that in mind because we're going to revisit JBS later in today's live stream. Okay, so that is to say, I think we've established that large meat companies do in fact have a monopoly, and the government is making moves to discourage it. This is happening here in the United States, but these happen to be multinational companies. So, for example, JBS. JBS USA is actually a subsidiary of JBS SA, which is a Brazilian company. Smithfield, I believe, is used to be American, but is now a subsidiary of a Chinese company I don't know the name of. And I think Tyson is still owned domestically, but I mean, that's not awesome either. So both houses of Congress have legislature being proposed about this particular subject this month. In fact, tomorrow, Wednesday, June 23rd, 2021, the Senate has a committee hearing specifically about whether or not there needs to be an independent inspector for these companies to audit whether or not their behaviors are contributing to a monopoly or are undercutting competitive nature within an open market. So yeah, that is literally tomorrow. I think maybe we can watch it on C-SPAN or something. And so this is all happening because farmers are getting lowballed for their livestock. And again, as discussed earlier in today's live stream, farmers are dealing with a lot of stuff right now, just to consider the climate, but also just they are also the ones who bear the burden of buying feed for their animals, and those prices are going up again, also because of climate change. Anyway, farmers are just getting super screwed. And consumers, again, we are paying more too. And so whereas companies like JBS are reporting record sales, record profits, at least for the last 5 years. And generally the system has been the same for about 25 years. So extrapolate that over 25 years and you can see that there's a ton of profit to be had, mostly coming out of our pockets, the consumers, and mostly not going into the pockets of farmers or processors, nor is it going to taking care of the employees at these particular processing plants, as was heavily publicized over the last year, considering all the issues with COVID in every one of these processing plants. Oh, and then another thing that is really awful about JBS and other companies like this having a monopoly share of the market. Again, we will discuss this later on in the live stream, but JBS, the hack that they experienced from on the cybersecurity side, disrupted nearly a quarter of all the beef processing in the United States, but that's only because it controls 22% of all beef processing in the United States. So can you imagine if this, I mean, those cybersecurity attacks happen on businesses of many different sizes, but if it were to happen but if we had more than just this one meat company doing most of our meat processing, it wouldn't have disrupted nearly as much, and it wouldn't be as much of a security issue for the entire country. Okay, and so the way that the government is going to try to regulate what's going on with these meat companies is that they are pushing through a couple different bills. One is I think it's going to be in the House of Representatives. There's a bill drafted that forces large processing companies to diversify from whom they're buying their livestock. So hopefully it'll make them purchase from a wider array of producers and therefore like spread the money around quite a bit more. Oh, and this is about the Senate. Senators this month rolled out a separate bill that would appoint a special investigator to enforce meat packing regulations and probe potential anti-competitive conduct. Anti-competitive, that's the word. Oh my gosh. The Senate Agriculture Committee is set to hold a hearing Wednesday, tomorrow, to examine meat packers' cattle purchasing and how that affects livestock markets and burger prices for consumers. Yes, so that is pretty crazy. Mr. Green did say America's food industry has a monopoly problem straight up. Oh, and so Andy Green is the USDA's senior advisor for fair and competitive markets. And so that is to say he's not, like, he does work for the USDA currently, but his background is in finance and economy. And so like he would be able to recognize a monopoly no matter what industry it is. And he is saying straight up that that's what we're facing in the food industry. He said some of the farmers' troubles stem from a handful of companies controlling the bulk of U.S. meat processing. And I guess we could go over those stats again, but that is just, it's really gross. And yeah, so it's just like another reason for one, to support your local farmers, try to buy local as much as you can, but also get in touch with your representatives in Congress. Literally both chambers, of Congress are assessing this situation, and we should be aware of like how our personal representation is doing or what they're doing on our behalf for problems like this. Oh, and then something I wanted to mention to y'all is that the North American Meat Institute, aka NAMI, which represents meat companies, is pushing back on tighter regulations for the industry. So that is to say they are opposing the regulations that Congresspeople are proposing right now on behalf of farmers and consumers who are both getting screwed on, I don't really want to say that phrase. Anyway, who are both getting the short end of the stick of this bargain. And the North American Meat Institute is also known as NAMI, and they publish a very famous meat buying guide. Here, I'll show you. They publish this guy. I'm sorry if it's like mirror image for y'all to see this, but it's the Meat Buyer's Guide is something that most industrial meat processors will use to classify and identify different cuts of meat. And so it's very common lingo, at least for like purchasers of meat in industrial settings, like for your grocery stores or for institutions like large restaurants and hospitals and stuff. Like they will say stuff like, oh, I need, so like they won't say beef chuck roll. They'll refer to stuff as, oh, I need like so many cases of 116As or 116Bs. And so this is to say this lobbyist group, this industry lobbyist group, has so much influence on the industry that they have essentially written what is known as like the Meat Buyer's Guide of the industry. And so they're important within the industry. However, I just want to point out that they are a group that is opposing regulations for that industry. And so we should examine what their motivations are and whether or not we should be looking to them for guidance on how to organize and classify meats. This particular book, I own this book because I actually worked at a tech company where we were trying to recreate this with like higher quality content and updated versions of it to accommodate the more like farm to table. I don't even know what we were trying to do with it, but we were trying to like recreate all of these photos. And the reason that they had that this was like the gold standard was because it's like the most commonly used guidebook in the meat industry. And yeah, it's published by an organization that doesn't represent the best interests of consumers or farmers. So yeah, just a heads up. We're doing good, y'all. It's only 25 minutes in. Okay. So that's about it for the meat monopoly. Keep an eye out for tomorrow's hearing. I'd be very interested to see how that goes. And then let's do an update on that JBS story. So we covered this story a couple weeks ago, that JBS had gotten hacked by cyber criminals, I guess is what they're called. I don't even know, by ransomware, by hackers who installed ransomware or withheld data from them. Anyway, excuse me. I went into a deep dive on an earlier live stream, and come to find out that JBS paid $11 million to resolve the ransomware attack, which seems like a lot of money, because it is for most of us. A company that recently faced a similar situation, what was it? The Colonial Pipeline. Their ransom was $5 million, and they paid like $4 million of it. And then the FBI eventually recovered about $2.9 million of that ransom, which is great for them, I suppose. But JBS, I think they haven't disclosed what the original demand was, but they did end up paying out $11 million to a hacking group called Revel. Maybe it's Revil. It's capital R, capital E, VIL. I'm not really sure how you're supposed to pronounce that. So that seems like a lot of money to me, and there are a lot of problems with this. So one, when you pay out in a ransomware situation, it sends a signal to the rest of that industry, the ransomware industry, that it is a profitable thing to go after companies like yours. So it's like really unfortunate for like the rest of us, because now it will embolden criminals of that nature. The other thing is that $11 million is, in the grand scheme of how much money JBS takes in every year, is not that much money. They bring in, it was like $54 billion in sales every year. And by sales, JBS is the largest meat company in the world. So again, $11 million is like not that great. In 2017, which is the most recent data I could get from Wikipedia, in 2017, just in the United States, they reported a net income of $138 million. $138 million in 1 year. And according to Wall Street Journal, they've only grown over the last 5 years. So again, that doesn't really represent that much of a hit to their finances. Like, it's not that much of a sacrifice for them to give $11 million in order to regain control of their computer systems. However, according to the daily podcast by the New York Times on this subject of cybersecurity. The cost of building out your business, like cybersecurity infrastructure, can be upwards of like 5 to 10 times more expensive than some of these ransoms are. And so when you see a company like JBS pay out $11 million, this relatively small portion of their net revenue, that is them saying that they would rather pay this small amount of money, this relatively small amount of money to them, pay that out to cyber terrorists rather than go back and like rebuild their infrastructure so that it is not as vulnerable to such attacks. I think that's like, I think it's really telling, and it's pretty analogous to the way that they refuse to invest in the health and safety of their workers, in the quality of the meat that they provide, in like the animal welfare standards that they have. Yeah, so it just to me just screams that they super duper are not interested in anything but their own profits. Oh my gosh. And you know what the other thing too is about that? Because y'all remember last year when there was a supposed meat shortage, and that like these large companies were blaming it on like low staffing and like coronavirus outbreaks at the meatpacking plants, which again, totally their own fault for having these conditions when people are so susceptible to something like COVID. So what I wanted to point out about that is, first of all, that there was no true meat shortage. There was a breakdown in the supply chain and distribution, but there wasn't really a shortage exactly. And some companies like Smithfield actually recorded record exports. So that is to say, their processing facilities and their livestock purchasing was going, that is to say, it wasn't completely disrupted. They were still functional. They just weren't sending the meat to American grocery stores. They were shipping that meat overseas. So it's not really that there was a shortage last year. It was just a disruption. Oh my gosh, I found in a different article from the Wall Street Journal that an executive from JBS on the Brazilian side, they declined to say which day JBS had made the payment. But he said, he actually said that the cost of the attack would be, quote, immaterial to JBS, which in 2020 generated $53 billion in sales globally. Holy moly. That was so disturbing to me to see an executive just straight up say that, like, yeah, we paid $11 million and it doesn't really matter. Like, whoa, are you serious? You have $11 million just hanging out and it doesn't matter? Then truly they have the resources to make things better, but they choose not to. And that disruption, the disruption specifically of the cyber attack, affected like everybody else in the supply chain. It cost farmers a lot of money because like slaughterhouses weren't able to take their animals, and even then they weren't able to sell their animals to the processing facilities. And then the prices went up for us consumers. And so, no, I don't think they're going to learn anything from paying out an amount of money that is, quote unquote, immaterial to the company in general. And if that's immaterial, then they should pay out to the people who were affected, like those farmers who had to like hold on to their livestock a little bit longer, and pay them for that. The lack of accountability and liability for companies like JBS is just mind blowing to me. And it's another reason, again, to get involved with your government representatives so that they can pass legislature that will hold companies like that accountable. Because truly, like, we don't have a ton of power individually to like say like, hey, that's messed up. Like, yeah, we can like opt out of purchasing from them, but the second piece is then giving them guidelines and regulations, because they are obviously not willing to do the right thing on their own. Okay, I think that's enough railing on JBS. I'll pop a link somewhere in here to the live stream where I covered most of the details about the cybersecurity hack for them. So you can go and check that out and get all caught up on that nonsense. And now, I think I'm going to end with a little bit of a palate cleanser, so that I'm not just like railing about large meat companies this whole time, although this kind of is a little bit in that thread. Okay. So there are two. So there are two movies coming out this year, and I want to say next year or later in this year, starring Christopher Walken and Nicolas Cage, each in their own separate movie, not together, telling super cool, esoteric food industry stories. So let's talk about the Christopher Walken movie first. It's called Percy versus Goliath, in which Walken plays a farmer in Canada that ends up in a legal battle with Monsanto over genetically modified seeds, or GMO seeds. If y'all don't know, Monsanto is a multinational company that sells seeds and chemicals related to large-scale farming and small-scale gardening. You might know their weed killer called Roundup. They manufacture Roundup, which is based in the chemical warfare from World War II, if y'all need a refresher on that one. And so Monsanto genetically modified some crops to be invulnerable to that chemical. And those crops are known as Roundup Ready. I first learned about this from a documentary called The Future of Food, which I super recommend. I can't find it anywhere on the internet, and I wanted to include it in my media recommendations YouTube videos, but again, I can't find it anywhere on the internet. So if you can find it, it's very informative, but it is a downer. But it's definitely one of those documentaries that kind of broke my brain and truly caused a paradigm shift for me. So yeah, go find it. It's super good. Anyway, I feel like the general conversation out there about genetically modified food, or GMO, focuses mostly on the nutritional or physical effects that the food has on we, the consumers. And then the conversation ends, because truly there isn't much of a difference between GMO versus non-GMO in terms of eating it. So nutritionally, it's not that big a deal. And also, for the record, agricultural breeding, selective breeding, has always been a form of genetic modification that human beings have utilized. In fact, earlier in this live stream, when I was talking about the drought story, that beef rancher pointed out that he had been curating the genetics of his herd for nearly a decade. And it'll be a huge challenge for him to get back to that point. It's such a bummer to have done all that work over years and years, hand chosen each cow that you liked and want more of. And then you have to sell them off. But when you hear GMO, in the context of a debate, what you should really think about is IP, or intellectual property, because when Monsanto owns the genetics of those seeds in the form of a patent, and therefore can sue anybody who is growing them without permission, or outside of a Monsanto approved contract. The trouble, or one of the problems, really, is that those seeds can spread via many methods. Literally any way that nature evolved to spread seeds, those seeds can still spread. But the recipient of those seeds like that land, is still liable for using them, and therefore Monsanto has the ability to sue. I'm not sure exactly if that's the crux of the film, like if that's what the plot is, but I do know that Walken, as the farmer Percy, does face a huge legal battle with Monsanto, hence the title Percy versus Goliath. And that is something that is a truly heartbreaking phenomenon. It is very real in the farming community, where, again, they're already facing tons of struggles, but then to be slapped with a lawsuit from somebody like Monsanto, who has just endless money, similar to JBS. And then they have to deal with all that. It's just like the mental and emotional toll, not even to mention the financial toll that it takes on farmers who are like constantly snowballing into debt. It's like it's super sad, and I'm really glad that like a film of this caliber is going to be telling that story, and that an actor of that caliber is going to be helping tell it. Yeah, I think it's so cool. I'm really excited to watch it. And then I saw another trailer for a film called Pig, which stars Nicolas Cage playing a hermit, I think in like the French like countryside or the forest. And this character ekes out a living by selling the truffles that his red wattle pig finds, which I loved because in the trailer they do show like an actual like red wattle pig, like he has like the little things on his neck, and it's very cute. But the pig gets stolen, which is a real phenomenon in the truffle world. Like truffle hunting is super shady. Pretty much any food industry where there's like a ton of money involved, any industry where there's like a ton of money involved and a lot of profit to be had, lots of shady stuff like this happens. But in the truffle world specifically, it is a known phenomenon that because you have to utilize animals, either a pig or a dog, to find wild growing truffles. There have been instances of competitors stealing each other's truffle animals, hopefully to like give them a different life in their own stable. But like, I don't know what happens when you steal a truffle pig. Anyway, I think it's like a super cool way to portray this like really esoteric phenomenon in the high-end food world, and to show a whole nother side of that luxury product that like you think you know all about, but like truly like there is a seedy underbelly. Yeah, I'm not sure when these movies are coming out, but you can find the trailer of Pig on YouTube, and I believe it was also in the Wall Street Journal, where I found a film review of Percy versus Goliath. Okay, y'all, I think that's about it for me today. Thank you so much for watching and attending today's live stream. I really appreciate every single one of you. So please do hit subscribe before you go. Support this channel via Patreon or GoFundMe. Follow me on Instagram and TikTok as Butchery101, and have an amazing week. I'll see y'all tomorrow. Bye.